So welcome to this webinar on the resilience in challenging times. I'm very happy to have on the screen today Marie-Liesse Calmejane, Senior Consultant from the Resilience Institute. Marie-Liesse will give us a 45-minute presentation followed by a Q&A session. Please do not hesitate to send your question on the chat room during the talk so that she can answer those at the end of her presentation. Also, please keep your mic and webcam on mute so that there is no interference. Thank you very much. Marie-Liesse, the screen is yours. Try to mute everyone.
Hi everyone. I'm not sure you can hear me properly. There's this big background sound. Can we make sure everyone is on mute? Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm really honored to have been invited to talk to you about resilience today. This is a word that was not that common and widespread when 20 years ago the Resilience Institute has been founded by Dr. Sten Hansen in New Zealand. And now, obviously, it's everywhere. And especially since the COVID-19 pandemic has started, here in Singapore, you probably know that the government has started this resilience fund to help business in the crisis. So, as Lydia just said, we'll have 45 minutes of presentation. And let me introduce myself quickly first and why I'm so passionate about resilience. Maybe I was meant to work for the Resilience Institute, not just because our color code matched very well, but more seriously, I fully buy into their definition of resilience, and really what they do resonates 100% with what I believe and who I try to be. So I moved to Asia 10 years ago with my family, 2 young kids at the time in Hong Kong, and tried to continue my corporate career there for another 5 years. And we had 2 more kids, and then arrived in Singapore more than 5 years ago. And this is when I decided to make a big shift in my profession and move from being an employee in a big multinational into becoming a coach and a freelancer. So I learned what it means to bounce back, and that resilience is not resistance. I will come back to that later. It was also a journey of amazing personal growth and amazing connections with lots of people. And I believe today I can say I really enjoy being in flow when I put my energy in the service of coaching people and talking about this topic that is really an important one. So I'm sure you're all probably very busy. Maybe you have a lot of tabs open on your laptop, or maybe you even are having your phone in your hand. What I would invite you to do for now is try to keep that agenda away for a small hour and really take a moment now to think about what was your intention in attending this webinar. Why did you want to spend an hour on such a topic? And try to connect now with your intention. Now, when preparing this webinar, I was wondering what would be useful. It's quite humbling because there is at the moment so much going on, blogs, webinars, workshops, articles talking about resilience. And I decided I probably would be of service if I can do 2 things. One, if I help you understand the core concepts behind resilience. And bear with me, some of you maybe are already pretty advanced and passionate about the topic, but we'll try to make it easy to grasp at the beginning. But more importantly, second, what I want to give you is some strategies that are relevant into your life and that the research at the Resilience Institute has really offered and experienced. So my goal is, when you leave this webinar, is that you can have a toolkit that you can draw from and use the tools immediately in your everyday life. So if I try to simplify, I like to present it as a simple equation. Let's say our life is full of events, right? Events are happening around us all day long. And the question is really, what is the perspective I hold on these events? What is my response to events? And the whole concept of resilience is that if we learn to be mindful and to have choice in the responses we make when faced with events, this is what means being resilient. So maybe think for yourself about it. What is your natural responses to events in general? And a good example is what we are all going through at the moment with the COVID-19. Can you notice what is triggering you most in that situation? Is it the uncertainty that we all are facing? Is it the constraints of the confinement that's just started here? Is it people criticizing what government decisions are taken, or how the schools are handling it? Just pay attention to how you respond in general to events. And here I want to share a bit more of a personal story, not just my professional career, and why really resilience is a topic close to my heart. So it happened 6 years ago. I was pregnant with my fourth kid in Hong Kong, when just 2 months before the delivery date, he was diagnosed with a genetic condition called achondroplasia. It's a form of dwarfism. This was an unexpected event, for sure. And I wasn't prepared. I was in shock. I clearly tried denial. Maybe the diagnostic is not right, but it was. And this is only when I shifted from resistance to acceptance of the reality as it was, that I could start to form a better response to the event that was happening to us as a family, and that I could start raising more useful questions instead of, why me, why now, why. It was more, how will we raise him to be a joyful boy and a resilient one? How does it change our perspective on what's the norm, etc., etc. And so 6 years down the line, I can just share that he is probably my greatest teacher of resilience. And because let's think about it. Here is the deal. We don't get to choose our circumstances and what life has in store for us. We can only really work on our response and how we decide to show up in life. Let me give you another simple example here. In that picture, as you can see, all the kids are experiencing the same situation, same event, but they do react very differently. Like the boys in the middle, you can see on their faces, the emotion is more like frightened or scared. But the girls on the top right, they seem to be thrilled, excited, like they're having the best time of their life. So same event, being in a roller coaster, very different, almost opposite responses. So my invitation for you all along this webinar, if you don't remember anything from what I say, is at least that you would be more aware of your thoughts and how you respond to events. Like, be convinced that you are in the driving seat and to choose your own response instead of letting the events choose for you and drive your life. Another small experience. Imagine this morning you were having a run in a park, which is still allowed in Singapore, and unfortunately you lost your wallet with $500 inside. How long will you keep thinking about it? One day? 1 week? A few months? How long will it take away your joy? You can take a passive response. Ruminate about it for very long. Or an active response. Getting angry at everyone when you arrive at the office or at home and really scream at your, partner. Or a more resilient passive answer would be to let go of the topic. An active one would be to really take action, go to the police, do a report, let your phone number so that people might maybe bring it back, which is likely to happen in Singapore. Again, we cannot change the events. We can only change our response. And this is really what resilience is in a nutshell. Now, it does not happen magically. It has to be built up. And you probably heard of this amazing concept called neuroplasticity. For very long, we thought that the brain was kind of fixed after maybe 20 years of development. But in fact, neuroscience has recently proven that we can rewire our brains almost all along our life. And it means that resilience can be learned. So wonderful science, but as a learner, when I discovered that, I was really curious to understand how. And this is really what I want to share with you today, is 5 keys to resilience, and especially in our challenging times. What I mean is tools, strategies to be more resilient. And in a nutshell, this is what we're going to cover during this 45 minutes. And as Lydia said, I'll keep some time to answer any question at the end. So, of course, we're going to I will share with you some insights, some of the research behind resilience science. But let me promise you one thing, this webinar is not going to change your life. It's not going to change your life because between knowing something, as you might have noticed, and really applying it in our life, there's a bit of a gap. So this is where practice comes in. It's only if, from what I will share with you, you can take on board a few of the practices and the exercise that you will start doing differently and changing so that you can then start to master being resilient and not just knowing about the resilience. So it's a journey, basically, and I hope you can learn here with me and start to practice how resilience is like a muscle that can be built over time and through practice. The first key I want to offer you is a very simple one, but very important. We call it self-check-in. Self-check-in, as you might imagine, is how is the ability to ask ourselves regularly, how am I? And to ask ourselves along the day. Maybe you wake up with your alarm and then check a few WhatsApp or even maybe emails already, and then you've gone for breakfast and meeting with, the kids or your partner at home. Then when we still went to work, maybe you check in with the receptionist, your colleagues, your team, and then meeting after meetings, you have a quick lunch break and then another piles of meetings. And now that we are confined, it's almost even harder sometimes because it's calls after calls after calls. And we end up at the end of the day having to rush to dinner. Maybe we then move to Netflix because we're so tired, and we end up going to bed still tired. But during this day, there has been a roller coaster as well. How able are we to notice where we are on that roller coaster and which direction we are going? So that's the invitation with the self-check-in. And I love this image of a camera. Well, not like a big brother camera who's watching everything you're doing, but more like this window that really look into yourself and is able to kindly invite you to know where are you, where am I, how do I feel. Another way to maybe illustrate it is to go and look at this spiral on the left, which is the development human model that the Resilience Institute has come up with almost 20 years ago. And it's a spiral where you can see there is a top part of the spiral, which is really the ability to go from mastering stress up to spirit in action. So it's how my body is energized and I can engage my emotions and my mind is focused. And this is what we call flying high. The other part, the downward part of the spiral, is really where it starts to become negative, in the sense that confusion is when your mind isn't even clear, disengaged, you start to really not be able to be with other people, it can go up to withdrawn, unable to deal with our own emotions, which is vulnerability, and then up to depression. So I'm not going to go into the details there, but my invitation is for you to take a moment and think, how would you grade yourself now or for the last 24 hours? From -10 to +10, where would you put yourself? And just by doing that regularly, it's really helping to at least notice where we are. And this picture, I think, probably resonate for some of you, or maybe most of you, now that we are in confinement. But being able to pause, not just once a day, but a few times a day, and be able to say, okay, I need to rest, or I need some time for myself. This is really the invitation here. Now, a second one, and of course, it's very linked to what we just said. The capacity to have some rituals in your day and to be able to come back to a calm state, a state where you can really rejuvenate. So we're going to talk here a lot about physical thing, how our bodies can be our best allies, because you might know we are actually interactive beings, and what happens in our mind, our thoughts, is actually very connected with what happens in our body, and it works both ways, obviously. So here, the second key is really about ritualized rejuvenation of our physiology. Back to the situation and where we are is such a good example. We are under pressure and we can become reactive, like almost on an autopilot. And we can feel it in our bodies. And maybe it's confusion, anger, being withdrawn, worried all the time. It's normal to feel all these emotions. But what I want you to realize is that we actually have more choices than we think. And it all depends on our resources. Let's say you want a result, you make choices to get to that result. For example, you want to lose weight, then you'll have to make healthy eating choices, or you want harmonious relationship in your family, then you have to make the choice consciously to show up kind and compassionate with your loved ones. But to be able to do that, we need to be building up our resources. The higher we have in terms of capacity in our resources, the better choice we will be able to make. If you haven't slept well, clearly you're not going to be someone easy to be around the next day. So how we do that? Let me spend a bit of time on what is called the performance curve. It's a curve that's been found out more than a century ago, so there's nothing new, but it's helping us to understand what we mean by and why the need for rejuvenation. So basically you have on the axis here the level of challenge or of pressure, if you want, that you apply, that is applied on you, and the curve is this one. And as you can see, this is a curve that starts from a state of being biologically absolutely rejuvenated, and the performance will grow in all this space here, which is what we call the white zone. You are being relaxed, and so your performance can increase until you reach this yellow zone, which is where we want to be, because this is the condition where our level of skills and our biology matches the level of challenge that is required. And so this is where we perform at our best. And we can do that for sustained time because our biology is still helping us somehow. But what we can see is that it increases only up to a point. And there is a point where here the performance curve starts to decrease. And this is still possible to reach peak in the red zone, but not for too long. And this is precisely what happens when under stress, you can really stretch yourself and still deliver a good result. But after too much time, if the challenge increases, then the performance will start to drop. And the gray zone here is a zone where we are still trying to stretch ourselves, but we're gonna start to actually make mistakes. Our mind will start to be confused, will make poor decisions, our emotions is not helping us anymore, and the performance is decreasing. We cannot stay there for too long, or we reach what is called the black zone, where it's clearly our biology is failing us. An image of that could be you faint or you completely zone out. A test that's being done and called the Bob test is this one. It's, Navy officer in the States getting trained to put their body under a situation that is close to panic. They have their, hands and feet tied, and they are supposed to bounce back from the bottom of the swimming pool and get up, get some air, and then blow the air out so that they can go again down and bounce back to the bottom of the swimming pool. As you can imagine, an exercise like this is dangerous, so is not recommended for us, but that's what allows them to actually learn to control their physiology and be able to still react as if they were in flow, let's say the yellow zone, even though they are putting their body under a stress that is more likely to be a black zone. But even for ourselves, think you probably experienced that. You are in a crowd, well, not likely to happen now, but and you suddenly start to think, I'm trapped, like I can't, and you literally, your body feels a sensation of panic, and you could almost feel you could die here. This is another proof that our bodies are really connected with our minds, because nothing here is really make you die. So what I want to suggest here is that we do a little exercise together. If you bear with me, because that's a technique that is useful all the time. So if you would close your eyes for a moment and just start to notice your breath. Just notice, where do you feel it? In your chest or in your belly? And start to pay attention to inhale and exhale. Now, if you didn't feel your belly moving, it's that probably you're not engaging your diaphragm, which is really important when we want to do this diaphragmatic breathing exercise. So now maybe put your hand on your belly, and I will count for 3 inhale and a longer exhale. So inhale for 3, 2, 1. And exhale for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale and belly gets bigger. 1. And exhale, belly gets thinner. 3, 2, 1. Inhale. 3, 2, 1. And exhale. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You should feel much calmer. This is just our physiology really helping us slowing down the system. And it works with no exception. You can practice it even just for 30 seconds, anytime, anywhere. This is proven to work. Without explaining the whole physiology behind, but clearly it's almost like using a handbrake. What our vagal nerve, which is in our brain, is used as a handbrake to slow down our heart rate, lower our blood pressure, and really enter into a physiological state of calm that we were not even just a few minutes before. Without spending too much time on this, because I feel it's everywhere on social media at the moment, but I don't know how many of yours practice meditation. Clearly, it's a practice that you can choose for yourself, morning, evening, whatever app works for you, but there are millions of apps, and here I just put the most famous ones. This is a practice that is also scientifically really proven to improve your well-being, and that will bring a quality, a skill of being mindful into your life. That's going to be useful in many, many, many areas. Another one is the power of the power nap. You probably heard of it. Again, some nice studies have shown that really it increases performance to spend 15 or not much more than 20 minutes having a nap. during the day, maybe just after this webinar, you can try, and increasing also alertness and reducing some major risk disease, including cardiovascular, is one of the main. So without giving you like all the other tools, let's just recap on this second key, which is being able to notice what happens in my body when I am under pressure, and then decide how I can create for myself a regular ritual and practices of rejuvenation. And it might be as simple to start with as sleep, paying attention to your sleep patterns and whether you have enough sleep every night. Now, moving up the spiral on the right, let's talk about emotions. I call this key emotional combat, a little bit like a kung fu. And it's really this resilience skill of being able to handle our emotions and to regulate, emotionally speaking. To start with, let's imagine you just got a feedback from a colleague of yours, or just someone from your family give you feedback, or you had a 360, debrief just before. What do you focus on? What do you usually keep from what is said in the feedback? Do you look at, the 95% green part, which is positive about what you just said or what you just did? Or do you focus on the 5% that could be improved? As everyone, let me tell you, I usually happen to be under 5%. And a simple example of that is, I run a workshop, for example, and I can see that two people at the back are chatting together, and I'm immediately into, what did I do wrong? What did I say that was not wrong? So why do we behave like this? Why do we focus so much on what's not working instead of looking at the positive things that were said? Very simply, it's back to our ancestors, and this is really built in our brains for millions of years, when being able to be watchful and to look for the danger around. Will there be a tiger coming in the jungle? That has developed that part of our brain. This is how they survived, basically. And as you know, the amygdala is that part in our brain that is triggered for reaction, for quick reaction. And there are basically three types of reactions. Either you fight the tiger, and this is rooted into the emotion of anger, or you flight, which is really more into the fear emotion, knowing that there's no chance it's gonna get it, or you freeze, which is more rooted in an emotion of sadness. These three so-called negative emotions are really predominating. Usually 70% of our emotions are happening there. And when we look at things, it's really, instead of looking at the whole picture, is our tendency to notice the danger and the red, what's not working, the negative piece. So what if we could learn to shift our focus and really change the way we feel about a situation? Again, this is something we can train our brains to do, and let's see together how we can do it. And for that, I first want to tell you about this tale that maybe you've heard. A grandson is with his grandfather, who is telling him this old tale. Your brain is like having two worlds inside. There is a light color wolf, which is full of joy, gratitude, and kindness. And there is a darker wolf, which is angry, always aggressive and restless and fearful. And the two wolves keep on fighting constantly. And so the kid asks, but who wins? And the grandfather replies, the one you feed. This is just a metaphor to say that if we keep on feeding negative or destructive emotions like anger, fear, craving, sadness, fatigue, the consequences of it will be, for example, if we constantly feed anger, little by little, this is gonna generate violence. If we're just anxious and fearful, for example, of the situation now, we'll end up really living a life of anxiety and maybe depression. Craving is a good one too, and we all know how wanting more of our phones, our social media feeds, sugar or other addiction leads to only want more. And this is what the dopamine does inside of our brain. It's to reward us for having more of it. Same for sadness. It can really be a destructive emotion to constantly feed. Not to say that we should ignore it, of course, but to stay too long with only that emotion will lead us to depression. And fatigue, really this sentiment that we are bored and nothing is making us excited in our lives. So the question for us really is, do we take time to stop and reflect on which territory we want to spend time on and our energy? Negative emotions can really help us, but if we spend all our time here, they're not going to be a recipe for success. So remember, again, constantly asking ourselves, how can I feed the other wolf? And here I want to offer this image of a muscle. The resilience is really about practicing and imagine it as being a biceps and a triceps. If we take, for example, anger, what would be a counter emotion that we should train in order to stay less in a situation where anger is predominant? Compassion. And let me just share a quick personal story, but you probably have experienced how sometimes we are able to shift from one to another almost instantly. I was in a train with my 4 boys. They were still very little at the time, and they were really making a mess. And someone in the train started to really get annoyed and let me know about it and asking me, can you just not do something to make them stop? And I was really taken by, like, what could I say? And I just very authentically shared that we were just out of the hospital for a checkup for the little one, and it was a bit of a stressful situation, and there was no way I could find for them a solution for them to behave differently, and I was sorry. And I could see, and really on the face of the person who was angry, instantly a shift from really being annoyed to suddenly not only being, kind, but almost amused and completely compassionate with the situation we were in. And here my invitation again is, without simplifying and saying that it's easy to do, is to see how we can build our positive emotions. So compassion to kind of counteract too much anger, calm in face of fear, gratitude instead of constantly trying to have more of what's actually not even good for us, how can we appreciate what we have in a single day? Joy to counter sadness, and how to find back like one's passion in order to as well not being led into fatigue and boredom. This seems maybe easier said than done, or maybe you think, well, if I was a monk on its mountain, yeah, maybe I could do that, but the situation we're in now is difficult and it's not that easy. We can also consider that being confined in our places is a great experiment, is a great invitation to practice more of that feeding positive emotions, because at the end of the day, it's in order to counter the kind of what's been called the negativity bias, which I shared just before with the scale and how we tend to look for the negative. If we want to counteract that, we need to practice and to build our positive emotions muscles even more. And to conclude on that one, if you would forget everything I said, and if you had to only keep one practice, I would recommend this one. It's a very simple gratitude practice. There are millions of them all over the place, and they're all proven to really work. This one is just to ask yourself after a day or a meeting, what went well? And to just spend a few moments to reflect that even if that webinar, for example, with the technology we are faced with is not perfect, but what went well? And to be able to write that down regularly is really helpful to feel it, and not just, wishful thinking, is to make sure we appreciate over a day or anything challenging that we've been doing, that something went well and it's a strength on which you can build on. Now let's move to the fourth key, and again, moving up, we're going to talk here more about our thinking patterns and how we can train our minds to reframe our thoughts. To do that, I would need a volunteer for a little game. You can do it in the chat box. No. Well, to be honest, there was no game. I just wanted to have you notice what have you been thinking when I have invited for someone to be a volunteer for a little experience. Did you straight went into the past and started sentences in your mind, like starting with if only, like if only I had my camera on, if only I had listened to what she just said, if only I was prepared and I had read more about the topic? Or was your thinking bringing you more into the future, worrying, what if I make a fool of myself? What if this session is recorded and maybe I'll just not find the right answer, or I'll just not manage to win this game that she's offering? To be able to just notice what's going on in our head is the first step. And this is what I call, it's a very simple model, catch it, being able to notice what we are thinking, check it, is it true, is it useful, and change it, how to reframe that thought. back to the catching of the thought, it's really by being able to be in the present and not flying into the past or to the future, but being present, that we develop our capacity to notice and catch our thoughts. So the practice of mindfulness that I gave is a great example of practice that will really build your ability to be present and to be able to notice the thoughts that are going through your brain. But that's just the first step. Second step is to check our thoughts. And you might have heard of this research done by Dan Gilbert, a psychologist from Harvard, and he studied this. When we start to view our situation as permanent, and again, COVID-19 is a good example. If we start to get sucked into the spiral of anxiety and worrying, it's going to be there forever and it's never going to change and it's so hard. This is a recipe to actually feel more depressed and more. And the research has shown that, again, that people who are having a pessimistic view on events will end up healing less fast and being less happy and even dying earlier than people who would adopt an optimistic viewpoint. And what's the optimistic viewpoint? Is just to realize and look at a situation as non-permanent. It's actually temporary. Difficult time is temporary. And even if some situations are permanent, like illness or a loss, your view on it, the way you will feel about this situation is going to change eventually. So here the invitation is to not only check our thoughts, but even check our language. What is the words that you use in your internal, self-chatter or even in your conversations? And two words are really important to catch. If we say always or never a lot, this is usually a sign that we are stuck into a permanent thinking pattern. And instead, to be able to look at a situation as temporary is to remind ourselves that change will happen. So how we do that, this is the third part, how we change, we reframe our self-chatter. Again, remember when I asked a question, can I have a volunteer for a little game? Did you immediately view it as a threat? Or can you see it more as a challenge, an opportunity to learn? Maybe this is going to be an interesting exercise. Maybe, I'm going to learn something. But eventually what we try to do when we talk about reframing is to look at the situation more as an opportunity and as an opportunity for growth. And as a resilience coach, I can say with many of my clients, very often what we are working on is having them reflect on, okay, how do they view the reality in general? Do they spontaneously see it as a threat or more as a challenge? And how can they work? How can I support them into working through this, way of looking at the reality and reframe it into opportunity for growth? And maybe you have received that, on social media, we receive so many things these days, but there was this circles, and the question was, who do I want to be in COVID-19? And it was 3 blue circles, almost in ripples. And the first step was, do I stay in fear of the situation? The second circle was, do I want to learn from it? And how do I do that? And the third one was, how will I grow through that experience and become and be someone different? Very simply, to recap, the tips for reframing is to remember, catch it, and the only way to catch our thoughts is to learn to be present. Second is to check it and looking at the temporary side of the situation. And third is to change it and see what opportunity lies there for me in a situation, a given situation. Okay, checking the time, maybe I'll be quick on that last one. Not that it's not an important one, it's actually absolutely central. The fifth key is connection. And we are born social animals, and clearly everything we're experiencing now, the social distancing, is a challenge for most of us, because we are wired to be socially connected to each other. And it doesn't mean meeting a lot of people. Maybe some of you are saying, no, I'm shy, or I'm an introvert and it's not for me. But in fact, even just one person and a face-to-face conversation, which can also happen online with all the technology we have, is really what we need here. To build our resilience, we need to have opportunities to feel authentic and to feel that people care for us and that we care for people. So it can even be with pets. In fact, any living things is a connection that helps us be more resilient. And nature is actually a big one. So walking in the jungle is a good way, is a good practice to feed also and feel that you are connected to something bigger. If you can't, it can even be to grow plants indoor. And more generally here with what we mean with connect in resilience is really this sense of belonging and being part of something bigger than us. And to spend time feeling connected is essential, especially in these times. So just for me to recap, the 5 keys I wanted to share with you is, and maybe you have, you take 5 pieces of papers with you and write down on the first one is self-check-in, put a grade between -10, +10, where am I? And do that regularly every day. Second is, what is my ritual for rejuvenation? And you can decide on that one. And maybe it's just a www, what went well. Third one is emotional combat. The fourth, catching, checking, changing my thoughts, reframing. And the fifth one is about connection. And maybe it's just to list down the one person that's going to be helpful for you to feel connected. This is it on my side. The Resilience Institute is working globally with lots of organizations, and I'd be happy to share more of that with you if you're interested. Especially, they have developed this app that allows you to measure through a diagnostic what is your resilience ratio, and this is very helpful to help organizations see how they are doing in terms of resilience. Thank you for having been listening to me for, sorry, I took 55 minutes. I don't see a lot of questions in the chat box, but I'm happy to take 1 or 2.
So Marie-Liesse, I can see one from Emmanuel Lestrade. How long does it take for our brain to be able to have new habits and be more resilient?
I don't see the question, but I totally believe you, Emmanuel. Research shows that 21 days is a kind of a go-to. I would say on any of these practice I'd love to invite you today is to start with what works for you. Clearly, regularity is important, and I think everything that can be daily, because it will be then included in your daily life and not something that you're gonna, forget after a few weeks, is really helping. But I would say, for example, the breathing or gratitude journaling, even doing that only for 2 weeks, there is research showing that it makes a difference.
Okay, there is another question as well. How can we access to the app to measure resilience?
So by going onto the website, www.resilienceei.com, and you can buy it for yourself at an individual level and install the app, and you'll get your ratio and a lot of self-help tools like videos from Dr. Sven Hansen talking about all these topics, and some micro learning that you can use for yourself. It's also a tool that we can roll out into organizations. And so really, I'd be happy to be in contact with you. My email is also there. And to see what would be useful for yourself or for your organization.
Okay, I can see the things, and so everyone is congratulate you.
But thank you. I can't see it.
Insightful presentation. I have to say myself that I was very impressed, and I found it very interesting, and particularly on how to shift from resistance to acceptance. So thank you very much, Marie-Liesse, and thank you all for attending this webinar. Just a quick note, we have, you can check on our website for the next webinars. We have another one on the 14th of April at 11 a.m. on how to work remotely and achieve more together with your colleagues, which I think is quite the topic of the time. So just register, and you will receive your link to connect. So thank you all. Have a good afternoon. A very good evening, and again, thank you very much, Marie-Liesse, because it's been very insightful and interesting session.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you for inviting me, and I hope, you get something out of it, and happy to stay in contact for those who are interested to know more.
Okay, thank you very much.